People are being sold in Nebraska. How human trafficking happens in our cities and small towns and what's being done to stop it. We'll talk about that today on Speaking of Nebraska. Welcome to Speaking of Nebraska. I'm Mike Tobias. Each week through early June, we're here to talk about issues facing our state. We'll also look at what's happening in state government and share a bit of Nebraska history. Human trafficking is happening in Nebraska. The majority is sex trafficking. Those sold are mostly female, often young girls. Research by Creighton University's Human Trafficking Initiative tells us 900 people are involved in Nebraska's commercial sex industry each month. And while some of this is voluntary prostitution, 135 people each month are considered at high risk of being trafficked. As part of our Sold for Sex project, we told the stories of Nebraska trafficking survivors. Here's some of what they had to say.
This is horrible. I hate this. This is not me, but I'm stuck. I don't know where to go. I don't know how to get out.
Sakura Yotagawa Campbell was trafficked by an abusive boyfriend.
I literally had to essentially turn tricks to get my money back.
You're officially in ownership of someone else. You're a product. You're cattle.
Laura, who asked that we mask her real identity, took a ride to Chicago with a guy she thought was a friend. Once there, he trafficked her out of a basement apartment.
That whole time was a blur. Being drugged, beat, raped repeatedly.
You get up the next morning and maybe you don't feel good and maybe your ribs hurt and it's hard to walk today.
Rachel Pointer was raped, then sold by a guy who lived next door. It started when she was 6 years old and lasted a decade.
It's really not that hard to buy and sell a human being in the state of Nebraska.
3 Nebraska women who survived sex trafficking and want others to know it happens in our large cities and small towns.
If anybody could take anything away from my story, is it could happen to anybody. Hopefully that it opens people's eyes, that they start to be more aware of their surroundings and what's going on. You know, maybe it'll make a mom check their daughter's Facebook and stuff more. You know, my biggest thing is just I share my story for awareness so that there won't be another me.
Those experiences have put me in this seat today to where I can talk about the horrible things that human beings are doing to other human beings. And hopefully even one person is going to listen to my experience and believe me and realize, yes, this is horrible. There's something I can do in hopes that somebody else does not have to go through this.
We have a responsibility as a community to stop ignoring it. There were a lot of people, obviously looking back, who could have intervened and didn't. And because of that, there are countless other kids and adults even who are still being victimized because we didn't recognize it back then. So we have a responsibility as a community to step up and say enough is enough.
Well, let's talk more about human trafficking with Megan Malik, who is Trafficking Project Manager for the Women's Fund of Omaha, and Alicia Weber. She's Program Manager for the Salvation Army's Fight to End Trafficking Program, which is also known as SAFE-T. Thanks for joining us. So we just heard the stories of 3 different survivors in Nebraska here. All were brought into trafficking in different ways. Talk about the model of trafficking in Nebraska and how it happens.
Yeah, you know, I think what's important to understand is that anybody can be a trafficker. It can be a mother, it can be a father, it could be a boyfriend, and it can also be somebody that you don't know. I think it's also important for people to realize that individuals of all genders are trafficked. We primarily know and hear the stories about women, but individuals of all genders are trafficked. Because we have the I-80 and I-29 corridors, that creates a larger volume oftentimes of trafficking and the ability to move individuals from place to place. So the trafficking market in Nebraska oftentimes doesn't just look static, that those individuals move.
Right, and that's some of the things we've seen from research over the years. Things that you've seen?
I've seen a lot of the similar. We've also had people who maybe were involved in prostitution beforehand as adults, but were forced into being trafficked. So we see that model some too as service providers. With labor trafficking, we see people who are brought in on legitimate work visas like H-2A, H-2B, but then their employers are holding that documentation over their heads and forcing them to work in unsafe work conditions or through debt bondage or something like that. We're also seeing an increase in trying to do outreach with carnival workers nationally because we see that's an area, and also the agriculture industry as a whole has also been a primary concern nationally for labor trafficking.
And you know, we'll talk mostly about sex trafficking during this program because that is the bulk of what's going on in Nebraska, but not to forget that there is labor trafficking, and often the two are intertwined.
Absolutely, absolutely. At the very least, with labor trafficking usually comes some form of sexual exploitation, up to and including that sex trafficking piece.
It's often not easy to quantify trafficking any place, and as well as in Nebraska. The best measure we've got is the research that the Creighton Human Trafficking Initiative did as part of this broader effort. From that, we know that number, that 135 per month, that are viewed as being high risk for being trafficking victims. Talk a little bit about this research and some other things that you've learned from it.
Yeah, I think this is really the first empirical data that we have to show that not only do we have a large commercial sex market in the state of Nebraska, but there are a number of indicators showing that many of those individuals in the commercial sex market are also being trafficked. And so when you think about that, at minimum 15% of the 900 individuals bought and sold multiple times in our state in a month are at high risk for trafficking, and then you also look that between 70 and 75% have some sort of indicator that they may be trafficked. That should be a huge concern. And we didn't, the data didn't just show that it was happening in urban areas and metro areas. The data showed that this spread across the state of Nebraska, and that trafficking happens in every community, and that no zip code is immune.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about that, because this data is done, it's from a deep dive into online advertising and looking at name references and things of that sort. And some of the locations really were, I think, pretty surprising for people when you saw that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're seeing as a statewide, because we are a statewide program, we're seeing definitely the rural areas are very much affected. It is sometimes harder to get into those areas to really meet individuals where they're at. But the numbers are still definitely there. And I think when we present those numbers, especially to the rural areas, there's a lot of anger that comes with that and frustration that this is happening in their communities.
And when we talk about the model, you know, I think there's still that thought that this is people on a street corner waiting for a car to come by and such, and that model really doesn't exist anymore.
Right. I mean, you can buy a person and traffic a person with the click of a smartphone. The primary place that this happens is Backpage.com. Through, you know, their dating section, their massage and body rub section, individuals are bought and sold. But what I think is important to realize is that this happens in plain sight, that an individual can be being trafficked and can be going to high school or can be going to work and can be your neighbor, and you may not realize that then this individual is being trafficked. It might be somebody that you see in a hotel walking, you know, down the hallway, and you see some red flag signs. And that's why I think it's important for us to continue to educate individuals of what this looks like, because it's important for us to step in, and if we see something, say something, be that person to, potentially call law enforcement, to tell the hotel management that something looks off here.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about Backpage. This is an online advertising website. It has different locations, 5 different locations throughout the state. Got a lot of attention earlier this year. There had been some legal actions. There was a Senate investigation. They very publicly said they were shutting down that portion, but that really didn't have an impact on this advertising, did it?
No, not at all. So I actually just spoke with Krista the other day, and she said that it took very little time.
Krista Price is with Creighton's Human Trafficking
Yes.
Initiative.
Yes. It took very little time. At first, it was back up to 50%, and then it jumped very quickly back to 100% of what they had been seeing previously on Backpage.
Yeah. So essentially, we're still seeing that as a avenue for that sort of advertising. It's just moved to a different section.
Yeah, and that trend, I think holds current when this used to mostly be on Craigslist, and Craigslist shut down that part of their site as well. Then it quickly moved to Backpage. And so, again, understanding that that's not what drives the market. Backpage does not drive the market. It is the demand for commercial sex that drives the market.
Let's talk a little bit about big events, because we're within a few weeks of the College World Series in Omaha, which brings a lot of visitors into the state and into Omaha. It also has typically been a place that has then spiked activity in terms of commercial sex trade. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think what's important to know is that it's not the events that cause sex trafficking, but when you bring large groups of individuals together, especially if individuals are coming from out of town, we know that there's oftentimes I can do this and nobody may find out. I've got disposable income. And so it definitely just naturally increases the sex trafficking that happens. We've seen this over the course of the NBA finals. We've seen this over the College World Series and the Super Bowl. And so, we're fortunate to have an event like the College World Series in Nebraska, but we have to be ready for it. We have to educate individuals so that we don't see those increases.
And important to know, too, that we've seen this in things like the State Fair and some other events that are not necessarily Omaha-based. So, again, it's not just an Omaha issue.
And I think it's important with the College World Series to know that it's not just an Omaha issue, because there's a ripple effect across the entire state during this time period. So everybody really does need to be watching for this in Nebraska.
So talk a little bit about awareness and enforcement things that may be going on during an event like the College World Series.
So I'll talk just briefly about awareness. The Women's Fund of Omaha is committed. We did some awareness during Berkshire Hathaway Days, and we're also going to be doing awareness during the College World Series. The Coalition on Human Trafficking, led by the Sisters of Notre Dame, are also doing awareness. And so you'll see some geo-tracking ads that will be available near and around the stadium. You will see cutouts in hotels that have information about sex trafficking in there. You'll see bus wraps. So just facts about that this is happening and knowing to look out for this. We are fortunate that the Coalition on Human Trafficking has trained over 80 hotels around the metro area on what to look for and how to respond. So I feel like our city's the Omaha City is doing a good job getting ready for this event, but we have to ensure that, we're not only training those individuals, but we're also training, other staff, and that we have the capacity, in law enforcement to really be ready for this.
Yeah, and we've typically seen some law enforcement actions, some stings, some operations that have gone on during the College World Series.
Correct, yes. And I think, again, across the state, we have task forces. We have 5 different task forces that are formalizing at this time. And so they're also getting more organized and being able to respond to this on a systemic level across the state.
You're both involved in the Attorney General's Human Trafficking Task Force, which is, I think, about 2 years old at this point. Talk a little bit about what's going on right now, what we can expect to see in the coming months.
Yeah, so I'm actually a co-coordinator for the Nebraska Human Trafficking Task Force as a part of our federal grant. What we've got right now is kind of our year of action with our strategic plan that we have in place. We're really looking at stepping up our game as far as law enforcement, making sure that we're doing a lot of proactive operations, formalizing some service networks across the state to make sure that service providers are collaborating and talking to each other about this, but also identifying what gaps in their areas there are in resources and training so that as a task force we can better fill those gaps. We also are working on a training committee that has 4 different subcommittees that's looking at building a speakers bureau to be able to get the information and awareness across the state faster, because until this point, it's really been a core group of people from Omaha trying to train, and that's just not working anymore. We also are really, really committed to making sure that services and law enforcement are still working together and working in tandem, so working to continue to build those relationships.
Which is a challenge to unite these two very different entities sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think, each has different roles, and there's an important reason for that, that it's a law enforcement's job to serve and protect, and it's a service provider's role to, oftentimes advocate, for the victim and survivor and to ensure they have the service needs. And then the end, everybody wants the same thing, and that's a safe community, and that's for, a decrease in sex trafficking. And so I think there's absolutely middle ground. And I think one of the most important things that the task force has done over the 2 years is to build these regional teams so that, one of the common themes we were hearing early on is, I don't know what to look for, and if I do see it, I don't know who to call. Mm-hmm. And we're now in a better place. We're training individuals what to look for, and now we have these regional teams across the state ready for those calls.
Part of this broader effort is the SAFE-T program.
Correct.
That you manage. Talk about that and what you've learned from the regional reps that you have scattered throughout the state.
Sure. So we have 3 direct service providers scattered across the state. We've got one in Omaha, one in Grand Island, and one in North Platte. And really, again, their job is to bring these local task forces together and make sure that everybody is speaking to each other, but then also providing that direct care, that direct case management or case coordination for survivors of trafficking. We've seen 31 cases since September. And that continues to climb. We just got a couple of referrals today again. So that number will change. We also do a lot of technical assistance. So we've met with over 55 different people again since September, talking about what this looks like and helping them kind of go through cases. And we're really learning a couple different things. We're learning how important it is that we all talk to each other. We knew that, but in a very, very real sense, how important that is. We're also learning the mental health consequences are just far beyond, even when we train, just far beyond what we ever could have imagined. Most people that we end up working with have some severe mental health issues related to the trauma, and really trying to manage that in a real and effective way has become difficult across the state, mainly because the resources are so slim, and those resources that are out there aren't necessarily effectively trained at this point.
Yeah. So the legislature just passed a bill that's going to increase penalties related to trafficking. Talk about that, what it does, and why you would say it's important.
Yeah, this LB 289 does a few really important things. Prior to it, you could traffic an adult or a minor and receive probation for that, and that the penalty that just did not fit the crime. And so we really fought hard that we needed to have penalties that fit the crime. But the other piece that this bill does is it defines solicitation of an individual for commercial sex without consent is trafficking. And that's really, really important, because those individuals that are knowingly purchasing somebody without consent, so knowing that they're purchasing a trafficked individual, that is trafficking. Also, the solicitation of a minor is trafficking. And so it defined that. And what that does is allow for also federal protections for a minor to be defined as a trafficking victim, and it will allow them resources and access to those federal dollars. The other thing, really important thing that this bill does is it protects individuals who have been trafficked from being prosecuted for participating in the trafficking venture. Oftentimes, individuals who are trafficked will be coerced into, that trafficking venture and recruiting others into into trafficking by no choice of their own. And so this bill really protects them from that. So it had a number of really important measures that we think will send a strong message in our state that we will no longer tolerate this.
So where does this put, if you had to look at other things that are maybe needed in Nebraska then from that standpoint, and where this puts Nebraska compared to other states?
I mean, I think this sends a strong message. We heard anecdotally early on that, you know, the Omaha Child Exploitation Task Force would often choose to prosecute in Iowa because those laws were so much better. And so I think this puts us in a place where it sets us up to having strong laws. But I think we have more to do. One of those things, Senator Pansy Brooks introduced LR for this next session to look at vacating and expungement laws for individuals who have been trafficked.
So what does that mean?
Yes. So what that looks at is, again, individuals who have been trafficked often participate not only in the recruitment and trafficking of others, but are often coerced into, you know, breaking the law in other ways, whether they, you know, are having to, you know, deal drugs, or they're, you know, having to participate in a robbery, or, you know, the hurting of another person. And it's because they are coerced and forced into doing that. And so then when they choose to get on a path of healing, and then they can't get a job because they have these other convictions. And so vacator and expungement laws, this LR will look at what other states have done. There's some precedent in other states for doing this. And so we'll bring some research and we'll look at a study and we'll see, you know, can we do something like that in Nebraska? Because we want to help individuals get out of the life, but then we want them to have a path to healing and a path to economic security, and we oftentimes cannot do that if they have all of these criminal records.
Leisha, you touched earlier on gaps. What are some of those, beyond legislation, what are some of those gaps that need to be filled?
Sure. I think just training gap is huge, and that's something we're trying to address this year, at least in part this year. We are struggling to find shelter, emergency shelter especially, because a lot of times the people that we come across are still, engaging in substance use to numb the pain, honestly, from what has happened to them. So we're still struggling to find good emergency shelter. We've got one now in Omaha, but beyond that, it's really lacking. Trained service providers in mental health and substance abuse as well are really serious gaps. And just resourcing in general, making sure that there are quality resources across the state. So if somebody is found or escapes in Omaha, they're getting the same treatment as people in somewhere like Scottsbluff.
Okay. Alicia Weber from the Salvation Army, Megan Malik from the Omaha Women's Fund, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
You can learn more about sex trafficking in Nebraska through our recent Sold for Sex project at netnebraska.org/soldforsex. There you can watch our 2 half-hour documentaries and access our other reporting and resources. Some other stories from NET News include a new Lincoln High School sculpture that students and their teacher hope will bring a diverse campus together in an unusual way. That story from Jack Williams. And next week, Ariana Brocious tells us the story of a 1930s project that planted more than 200 million trees in the Great Plains.
My story looks at the history of this program and where these trees stand today. The National Agroforestry Center, which is based here in Lincoln, has begun to digitize the records of these historic plantings from the 1930s and has found that about 50% of the trees planted then are still on the landscape in Nebraska today.
You can listen to or read all of our signature stories at netnebraska.org/news and connect with NET News and our journalists on Facebook and Twitter. Well, state government reporter Fred Knapp joins us now. The budget battle came to an end this week. Let's go back, though, and talk first about what the governor vetoed out of the budget that was passed.
Well, he vetoed a total of about $57 million. There were $11 million in this big heating, ventilation, and air conditioning project they have going on at the Capitol. There was $15 million that the legislature wanted to, in effect, shift from roads funding to cover other stuff. And then there was about $32 million in social services kinds of aid to providers of services to people with developmental disabilities, behavioral health problems, and Medicaid, most of which goes to nursing homes.
Yeah. And then some of that was what the Appropriations Committee went back and said, okay, we're going to fight about 32 million of the 56 million in vetoes, and some of that is what they said they were going to fight.
Right, the disabilities, the nursing homes, the behavioral health, and they did have quite a drawn out and bitter debate about it, but in the end they only had 27 votes to override, and it takes 30 to do so, so the vetoes remain.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about some of the battle that played out yesterday, and at times it was pretty emotional.
It was. Senator Bob Christ, who himself has a developmentally disabled daughter, was one of the leaders of the fight to override that portion of the veto. And he is a registered Republican in the legislature, which is officially nonpartisan. He's a moderate. He's talked about running for governor against Governor Ricketts. And he had a lot of moderate Republicans and Democrats supporting him. On the other hand, were people who said, we can't afford it. We're cutting it too close to the edge in terms of funding. And a group of conservative Republicans, some of whom have received campaign contributions and other support from the governor, prevailed.
And that's been, to some degree, an ongoing theme throughout this session, is kind of this group of senators. And I think there was a story in the World Herald this morning that talked about 16 of the 21 that voted all the way through to uphold the governor's vetoes were all state senators that received some campaign funding from the governor over time. So talk a little bit about this ongoing theme, and it did play out again during the budget battle.
It did. It started last year when the governor, as you recall, opposed 3 incumbents of his own party who had opposed him on either the gas tax, capital punishment, or driver's licenses for DACA recipients. They got replaced, those moderate Republicans got replaced by more conservative Republicans, and there are rumblings that a similar campaign is going to take place in next year's elections. Okay.
Other than the budget, a couple other things that were passed. Talk about those.
Well, today there was a bill to raise the retirement age for future teachers from 55 to 60. People are living longer, and there was also one to make it harder for cities to declare bankruptcy if they have not kept up with their required pension contributions.
And real briefly, expecting a resolution from Senator Chambers related to President Trump. Right.
He wants to memorialize Congress to invoke the provision of the 25th Amendment that says the president is not fit to serve, and we'll see if they get to debating that yet this year.
Okay, thanks, Fred. Well, during the legislative session, follow Fred's coverage on NET Radio and on our website at netnebraska.org/news. Well, he was number 2 on the Lincoln Journal-Star's sesquicentennial list of notable Nebraskans. The story of Standing Bear is this week's Nebraska 150 moment.
Standing Bear was the leader of the Ponca tribe of Nebraska who successfully argued in the U.S. District Court in Omaha that Native Americans are persons within the meaning of the law and had the right to a fair and just trial. Standing Bear became the first Native American to be recognized as a person in the 1879 federal court decision. He is best known for his words,
Nombe te hihate ewaki gumbaji. My hand is not the same color as yours. If I pierce it, I shall feel pain. If you pierce your hand, you too will feel pain. The blood that flows will be the same color. I am a man. The same God made us both.
Standing Bear spent his life in constant struggle to gain equality and justice for Native Americans. Standing Bear was inducted into the Nebraska Hall of Fame in 1977.
Well, that's all for this edition of Speaking of Nebraska. Next week, we'll talk about Nebraska's National Guard. Thanks for joining us. Good night.